In his third autobiography, Frederick Douglass was remembering the crisis of 1857 to 1861, and he remembered it as a time of what he called the stern logic of events. And then he said, in every way possible during that period, in the columns of my paper and on the platform, by letters to friends at home and abroad, I did all that I could to impress this conviction upon the country. But nations, this conviction being the abolitionist conviction, but nations, he said, seldom listen to advice from individuals, however reasonable. They are taught less by theories than by facts and events. Take that wherever you want. You can go up the street to that building or that building or that building and that building and hear a lot about theory. And that's fine. God bless my colleagues, the theorists. But sometimes people certainly react to, if are not taught by events that they don't always see coming. Less than a year after, about a year after the Dred Scott decision came down, in spring 1857, a terrible economic panic hit the country, known soon as the Panic of 1857. Stock price was just plummeted. It had a lot to do with the end of the Crimean War, and Russia once again started exporting wheat. And American wheat was no longer in any way a monopoly, and the American heartland of agriculture was immediately hurt. There was also tremendous overspeculation in Western lands by Eastern banks. There were many other causes of the Panic of 1857, but rest assured, Northerners and Southerners were now well rehearsed at blaming each other for it. Abraham Lincoln announced himself as a candidate for the U.S. Senate in the summer of 1858 out in Illinois. This would be his famous campaign against Stephen A. Douglas. It would involve the most famous and important, probably still most important political debates in American history, the Lincoln-Douglas debates. There were 7 of them. Name a town in Illinois, there's a chance they had a Lincoln-Douglas debate. Peoria had one. They had them all over the place. A few of them were attended, they say, by as many as 10,000 people outdoors. They had parades and flags. And here, I have a couple of weird images of this. We'll come back to the maps. Oh, there they are. These 2 different photos, they were never photographed together, makes Stephen Douglas, who was only 5'6", look almost as tall as Lincoln, who was 6'4". Throughout the debates, Lincoln called Douglas Judge Douglas because he had once been a judge and not senator. Woo! That didn't sit well. There were all sorts of paintings and images. This one's a pretty bad one, but why not? Lincoln would sometimes wear that white coat. Woo! Hey! And the debates were done under this format. They flipped a coin, and he who won got the first hour. We would not have the attention span. And then the other guy got the next hour and a half. And then each of them got a half hour at the end. And it was just free-for-all. There was no moderator. They had it out. All the great questions of the time, especially the great question of the expansion of slavery, the great question of popular sovereignty, the great question of the legacies of the Kansas and Nebraska Act, which Douglas wrote. the legacies of Bleeding Kansas now, which is run its course pretty much, and the corruption of those elections they tried to have in Kansas. Oh, my God, stuff in the ballot boxes. Was democracy working in Kansas? No. Was popular sovereignty working in Kansas? No. But Stephen Douglas still argued it was the only way through this. Douglas made it absolutely clear he didn't care a lick, and that's not the only word he used, for the freedom and the liberties and rights of black people. And Abraham Lincoln stood up face to face with him and said, no, that's not what Republicans believe. We believe you are wrong. And Doug, in one of the debates, it might have been the Freeport, Lincoln kept making a refrain out of the word wrong. No, Judge Douglas, wrong. No, Judge Douglas, wrong. And then he made this claim that Republicans believe in the right of black people to their liberties. Now, he qualified that and famously qualified it by saying he believed that black people, white people, any people have the right to the fruits of their labor, though he would not want a black man to marry his daughter. He didn't have a daughter. Now, people have, over the years, plucked out wherever they want. There are many, many pages of the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and they're really well recorded. They were covered by the national press, every one of them, even international press. Even Frederick Douglass went to Illinois and followed around, I think, 2 or 3 of the debates. He was in the crowd. In fact, he was not only in the crowd, Stephen Douglas saw him in the crowd, and he started using Douglas. He kept spinning these yarns about, Abe Lincoln, he rides around in carriages with Fred Douglas. And nobody called him Fred unless they meant it to be derogatory. There were times when Douglas would encounter people, and he would say, that'll be Frederick, ma'am. Lincoln supposedly was riding around in carriages with that black man, Fred Douglas, and they're both wearing top hats, and they're both really well dressed. That's what the Republicans are. They're the party of N-word lovers. It was an amazing set of debates. But to launch the debates, Lincoln went to Springfield. Actually, he already lived there. He lived 2 blocks away from the old Capitol. And he gave this speech, the famous House Divided speech. I'm not going to read the whole thing, don't worry. As an announcement of his candidacy. And if you're ever in Springfield, go to the old Capitol. Not only is that where Barack Obama launched his campaign, out on that big porch, but up on the dais inside the Senate or House, whichever it was, is where Lincoln delivered the House Divided. If we could first know where we are and whither we are tending, and Lincoln, by the way, had a kind of a high-pitched mid-southern Illinois, southern Indiana twang. He could really sound southern. We could then better judge, he said, what to do and how to do it. We are now far into the 5th year, counting from Kansas and Nebraska, since a policy was initiated with the avowed object and confident promise of putting an end to the slavery agitation. Under the operation of that policy, that agitation has not only not ceased, but has constantly augmented. In my opinion, it will not cease until a crisis shall have been reached and passed. And then he goes to the Bible. A house divided against itself cannot stand. I believe this government cannot endure, permanently half slave and half free. He's not the only one saying that at this time. I do not expect a union to be dissolved. I do not expect the house to fall, but I do expect it will cease to be divided. Either the opponents of slavery will arrest the further spread of it, and place it where the public mind shall rest in the belief that it is in the course of ultimate extinction. And the South, the Democratic Party, never forgot those two words that he used in the House Divided speech. Ultimate extinction, or its advocates will push it forward till it shall become alike lawful in all the states, old as well as new, north as well as south. Don't forget here what the Dred Scott decision had said. It meant slavery legally could now go anywhere. We have no tendency to the latter condition. Have we no tendency? It's a question. To the latter condition. Let anyone who doubts carefully contemplate that now almost complete legal combination, and he goes on to call it a design, and then he said it's a concert of action, and then he said it's created by the chief bosses of the slaveholding South. Lincoln became the slave power conspiracist. And when you turn the first page, you turn away from the poetry of A House Divided, you get to the rest of the speech, which is about 8 full pages of Abraham Lincoln making the case for why the Republican Party now in 1858 must create its identity, must forge its purpose on resistance to the Dred Scott decision. But he doesn't stop there. He uses these beautiful, well, depending, you might not think they're beautiful, but these amazing homespun metaphors. Don't forget, that slave power conspiracy idea now animates this Republican Party, animates lots of people in the North who are fearful of slavery, fearful of its spread and its expansion, fearful of its denigration of free labor, and fearful of its morality, all coming together now around this coalition of the Republicans. And then Lincoln says, it's kind of like the building of a house, since he started with House Divided. We cannot absolutely know that all these exact adaptations are the result of pre-concert conspiracy. But when we see a lot of framed timbers, different portions of which we know have been gotten out at different times and places and by different workmen, and he names 4 names. Stephen, Franklin, Roger, and James. Who's that? Stephen Douglas, Franklin Pierce, who'd been elected in 1852, the dough-face Northern Democrat who was very pro-slavery. Roger is Roger Taney, Chief Justice. And James is James Buchanan, who just got elected in 1856, another dough-face. That used to be very derogatory. It's actually descriptive, mostly. Buchanan was a Pennsylvania Democrat who was himself very pro-slavery. But it made a nice refrain, Stephen, Franklin, Roger, and James. And when we see these timbers joined together and see they exactly make the frame of a house or a mill, all the tenons and the mortises exactly fitting, and all the lengths and proportions of the different pieces exactly adapted to their respective places, and not a piece too many or too few, not omitting even scaffolding, or if a single piece is lacking, we can see the place in the frame exactly fitted and prepared to yet bring such a piece in. States. In such a case, we find it impossible to not believe that Stephen and Franklin and Roger and James all understood one another from the beginning, and all worked upon a common plan or draft drawn up before the first lick was struck. What's the slave power conspiracy? It's the deep state. They didn't have that phrase. I've often said, lots of scholars have said, the slave power conspiracy idea is one of the most potent and successful political slogans in American history. It worked, partly because it had a lot of evidence to it. But the other side was more than ready. My goodness. By the way, all kinds of Republican politicians. William H. Seward of New York, Senator of New York, who was already seems like everybody's primary front runner for the presidency in 1860. More on that in a minute. Henry Wilson of Massachusetts, senator from Massachusetts, eventually vice president under Ulysses Grant, a radical Republican. He wrote a famous treatise on the slave power that was widely distributed. I mean, check out his statement of the slave power. Reflecting men, said Henry Wilson, saw as never before that there must be some malignant and potent agency at work. Something's going on here that could accomplish such results and give such a character to the nation's history. They call it the slave power. They saw that there existed a commanding power in the land, which made its influence everywhere felt, and before which all other interests were compelled in greater or less degree to bend. There's some kind of Goliath, some kind of political persuasion at work, run by the South. They've held the presidency, they've held the Supreme Court, they got committee chairs in Congress, and they just got the Dred Scott decision. So there wasn't a lot of convincing to do to a lot of Northern voters. But what they're up against now is a potent conspiracy theory from the other side. And it was known by the phrase, the Black Republicans. So much writing on this, so many great quotes. I'm only going to use one, promise. The New Orleans Daily Crescent, in the week right after the fall election of 1860, when it was clear Lincoln was going to be the victor, said this in an editorial. The history of the abolition or Black Republican Party of the North is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of absolute tyranny over the slaveholding states. You can hear a lot of words in here that we hear today. They have robbed us of our property. They have murdered our citizens while endeavoring, this is after John Brown's raid, while endeavoring to reclaim that property by lawful means. They have set to naught the decrees of the Supreme Court. They have invaded our states and killed our citizens. They have declared their unalterable determination to exclude us altogether from the territories. They have nullified the laws of Congress. And finally, they have capped the mighty pyramid of unfraternal enormities. These people could do rhetoric, at least, by electing Abraham Lincoln to the chief magistracy on a platform, and by a system which indicates nothing but the subjugation of the South. The slave power conspiracy and the Black Republican conspiracy ideas left little doubt that you can't compromise with this. Each one is a kind of a poison on you, poison on your society, a poison on your mores. Where's the middle? Is there any middle? Last little point on this. There's so many places to look, but not least of which was religion. This was a very religious society, mostly Protestant, but not exclusively by any means. Jews and Catholics were in rising numbers in America, but somewhere around 80% of Americans consider themselves Protestants by the late 1850s. A national fasting day was declared on January 4th, 1861. This is after South Carolina's secession from the Union, back in December, more on that in a second. And just before the other 6 states of the Deep South are about to pass resolutions of secession. Sermons all over the country, thousands of them, North and South, took up this National Day of Fasting. Maybe we should do that now. Every week. No, I don't know. But Lord, Henry Ward Beecher, from his famous church in Brooklyn, probably the most renowned American preacher of that time. He gets into the sex scandal a whole lot later, and I don't know, it sort of hurt his reputation, but But to his congregation, he said, the good abolitionist that he was, that the South and the country needed to repent. Quote, the most alarming and most fertile cause of national sin is slavery. About this great evil, the Bible could not speak with less ambiguity, he said. I'm still quoting, where the Bible has been in the household and read without hindrance by parents and children together, there you have an indomitable yeomanry, a state that would not have a tyrant on the throne, a government that would not have a slave or a serf in a field. It's the confidence with which everyone is saying these things. This isn't just righteousness. It isn't just belief. It's really confident belief. But on the other side, probably the most famous preacher in the South at this time was in South Carolina. His name was James Henry Thornwell. He operated out of Columbia, South Carolina. He took up the same theme that day. Same day, same Sunday, and addressed our national sins. To Thornwell, slavery was, quote, good and merciful. It was the best way of organizing, quote, labor, which Providence has given us. About the fairness and propriety of slavery in the eyes of God, he had no doubt. He said that the relation betwixt the slave and his master is not inconsistent with the Word of God. We have long since settled. We cherish the institution, not from avarice, but from principle. This is not the old necessary evil argument now. Oh, God, it's been entailed on us. Oh, my God, what are we going to do? We can't get rid of it. I don't like it. I hate it. No. We love it. Oh, I'll spare you. There was a pro-slavery preacher in Brooklyn, just 2 blocks, a Presbyterian, up the street from Beecher's church, who blamed the entire crisis on abolitionists. He said it was, his name was Henry Van Dyke. He said, the tree of abolitionism is evil, and only evil, root and branch, flower and leaf and fruit that it springs from and is nourished by an utter rejection of scriptures. It's the abolitionist's fault. It's Henry Beecher's fault. Well, of course, Douglas won that Senate election because they didn't have direct election of senators yet. It went to the legislature of the state of Illinois, where Douglas won by 54 to 46 in the Illinois Senate. But Lincoln had run a hell of a race, and he got his name out among the American voters, especially in the North, as never before. And he's going to wait his turn, so to speak. Now, sorry, I got to move ahead again. Here, there we are. Anybody ever been to Topeka, Kansas? Yeah. You been to the state capitol? All right. One person. You got to get west of the Hudson, folks. You got to go to that greater mid. I never even considered Kansas the Midwest growing up in Michigan, but they call it that. The entire rotunda of the Kansas State Capitol is surrounded by this huge, magnificent mural of John Brown. Now, murals always tell a story. Of course, this one really tells a story. John Brown's only, 2 and 3 times the size of everyone else. He's got a rifle in one hand and the Bible in the other, and his foot on the head of a Confederate soldier who no doubt has killed a Union soldier. We got flags. We got men with rifles. We got war. We got tornadoes. John Brown is a tornado. Woo! Now, it's not easy to talk about John Brown in 5 minutes or 10. Stephen Vincent Benet, a great epic poet, said that in a 1928 epic poem called John Brown's Body. He said, "The law is our yardstick, and it measures well, or well enough when there are yards to measure. Measure a wave with it, measure a fire, cut sorrow up in inches, weigh content. You can weigh John Brown's body well enough, but how and in what balance do you weigh John Brown? He had no gift for life, no gift to bring life, but his body and a cutting edge. But he knew how to die." John Brown's death, historically, here's a theme for you, was far more important than his life. A ragtag family. He had 20 children. They didn't all survive to adulthood. Hold on here. I have a real photo of him here. Oh, there he is. You want to go to lunch with this guy? His family was a rolling stone. He born right up here in Torrington, Connecticut, moves out to the burned-over district in northern Ohio. He tried almost every kind of business there was in the antebellum North. He's a farmer, a tanner, and many other things. He was jailed for debt. He had way too many children. And he raised his kids like a good Calvinist father, eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. When he felt like he had failed his children, he often would give them a whip, and he'd get on his hands and knees and he'd order them to whip him. Of course, they got whipped too. He was a man of deep religious faith. He never joined a political party. We're not sure, but he may have never voted. Politics was just something for the unrighteous. He was about purging the nation of sins, no doubt about it. And he thought slavery was the biggest of sins, the greatest of evils. It was more than the real thing of an abolitionist. He was an abolitionist who believed in revolutionary violence. If someone had to die in a cause so right and so righteous, so be it. There's a test for you. That's why I am always uncomfortable with the John Brown Sainthood Society, which I never joined. He was in some ways a terrorist. They didn't use the word much in the 19th century. They used the word murder. He murdered 4 pro-slavery advocates who were actually pretty poor farmers out in Kansas, in bleeding Kansas, hacking them to death with broadswords. He and his team, his band. A lot of people never knew quite exactly what John Brown had done in Kansas, which was just as well. He especially didn't tell them what he had done when he was raising money for his Harper's Ferry raid. Now, but he was the real thing. He took 10 slaves out of Missouri on a raid from Kansas back into Missouri and brought them back into Kansas, hid out for a month in the desperate sort of wilderness without enough food, and then trekked up into Iowa and across Iowa into Illinois and through Chicago and into Michigan and all the way to Detroit. Finally, from Illinois to Detroit, they had a train provided for them, or a car and a train provided for them by some abolitionists. And a baby was born on that car to one of the enslaved women, and she was named John Brown Daniels. And when old Brown took them to the Detroit River and ushered them across the river into Windsor, into freedom in Canada, those people thought he was a liberator. Rest assured, they thought he was a savior. He was. But what he did at Harper's Ferry was not good military sense. 18 men, as the song says, is 18 men so true. They attacked the largest federal arsenal in the United States with more gunpowder and more sidearms and rifles than any other single place in the country. On the theory that they were going to launch a spreading, enveloping slave insurrection throughout Virginia. He was going to be Spartacus. It lasted 2 days, and it got almost everybody involved killed, except himself, 2 of his sons, and another of his 18 men so true. Some of them were shot on rocks out in the Potomac River, and the citizens of Harper's Ferry made target practices out of their mutilated bodies. John Brown was captured, badly wounded, put on trial a month later in Charlestown, Virginia, in the most celebrated trial of American history down to that day. No question. He pled not guilty. He was charged with 3 crimes, all capital offenses. He said he intended to purge this land with blood, that he was doing God's work. We've come in our lives in the 21st century to distrust people who engage in violence in the name of God. I'm not judging anyone personally, but revolutionary violence is a difficult question. John Brown makes us face those questions. He was a white man who killed white people to free black people. What do you do with that in the middle of the 19th century? What do you do with that today? He was a man who said there are some causes worth killing even innocent people for. What do you do with that? And he welcomed the gallows. There isn't any doubt about that. He welcomed his hanging. He said so. And while he was in jail for that month, recovering from his wounds, he wrote about 110 letters all over the North, newspaper editors, other abolitionists, to his family, his wife, his children, in effect writing his own epitaph. And he's been depicted in so many poems and so many paintings. This is the great Hoventon painting. It's the painting of John Brown, who already has the noose around his neck as he's coming out of the jail. Not true, but who cares? And he's kissing a black child. The Legend of the Kiss, as it was called in a poem by John Greenleaf Whittier. That never happened. But in many ways, the country, at least the abolitionist part of the country, needed to think it happened. He was the gentle old man on the way to the gallows, dying for people, kissing a black baby. But over time, Brown became what people wanted to make of him. That's what we do with symbols. It's especially what we do with martyrs. Martyrs don't just happen. Look through the entire history of martyrdom in Christian cultures, Jewish cultures, Muslim cultures, lots of cultures, martyrs are made by people because they need them. In 1932, W.B. Du Bois, the great black scholar, went to Harper's Ferry. Harper's Ferry had become a meeting place for the NAACP, for the Niagara movement, for old abolitionists who've become younger abolitionists. Their children have become abolitionists of a kind in the age of the NAACP. They had a celebration of John Brown at Harper's Ferry in 1932. And here is the ending of Du Bois's speech. Listen to his words. Some people have the idea that crucifixion consists in the punishment of an innocent man. No, says Du Bois. The essence of crucifixion is that men are killing a criminal, that men have got to kill him, and yet that the act of crucifying him is the salvation of the world. John Brown broke the law. He killed human beings. Those people who defended slavery had to execute John Brown, although they knew that in killing him, they were committing the greater crime. It is out of that human paradox that there comes any crucifixion. Now, one could debate Du Bois on that, but the crucifixion in Christianity, of course, is necessary. There's no Christianity without the cross. And there's no John Brown hero without the gallows. And in Christian America, they made the most of it. Now, there's an election right after his hanging. In 1860, the United States had, all right, we're moving now. All right. The United States had a unique election. I used to say the most unique until my old mentor reminded me nothing can be most unique. It either is or it isn't. Thank you. I can never say that without thinking of Dick Sewell instructing me of that. Thank you, Dick. But this election everyone knows it's going to be pivotal. Everyone knows the slavery crisis is on the ballot, but nobody knows just what's going to happen. The South is threatening the secession. Will they? Won't they? Maybe. It's going to be a four-way election. Always a recipe, obviously, for no one getting a majority. Always a recipe for terrible division, and that's exactly what happened. The Democrats chose to have their convention, their national convention, in Charleston, South Carolina, of all places. Bad choice. If there was a seedbed or hotbed of secessionist thinking across the South, it was Charleston. But they, chose their cities for conventions way ahead, just as we do today. And the Democrats had, in effect, two distinct factions. One was behind Stephen A. Douglas, the Northern Democrat, who now has been trying to run for president most of his life. And he had a hold on a lot of that Democratic Party. But he was the author of Popular Sovereignty, which a lot of Southerners now had come to loathe and basically believe they don't even need it. Furthermore, in one of the debates with Abe Lincoln in Illinois, at Freeport, Illinois, Lincoln pinned Douglas, sort of, at one point and said, but can a state in the West still outvote slavery if it so chooses? Judge Douglas, answer that. And Douglas finally said, yes, okay, that's popular sovereignty. Yes, they can still vote it out. To Southerners, that became known as the Freeport Doctrine. Douglas didn't claim that. But the Freeport Doctrine now said, whoa, Dred Scott decision? Slavery is now open to spread anywhere by law in the Fifth Amendment? No, Stephen Douglas was saying they can still hold a referendum out there and they can vote slavery out. It can't be both. So he's not popular with Southern Democrats, to say the least. And at one point, when he got a majority, but not the necessary, they had a 2/3 rule. to get their nomination. You had to have 2/3 of the delegates. He got 60% or something, not even close to 2/3. And the Southerners of the Deep South, led by Jefferson Davis, walked out. And they planned a month and a half later, to have their own convention. And they went up to Baltimore, pick a border state when you need any kind of unity, if you can manage it. And they went to Baltimore. And by midsummer of 1860, there were two Democratic parties, the Southern Democrats and the Southern Democrats and the Democrats. And the Southern Democrats nominated John C. Breckinridge of Kentucky. There's another pattern here. You need some unity, you need somebody in the middle, you go find somebody from Kentucky. The Republicans met in Chicago. Abe Lincoln's home state. Front runner was William H. Seward of New York. Looked like Seward was going to be the nominee. He had good abolitionist credentials. He'd been in the Senate for a long time. He had given the famous irrepressible conflict speech in 1858, where he announced to all, and it was reprinted everywhere, that this crisis over slavery in the West, the fight over slavery's existence in the future, was irrepressible. It's basically a rethinking of a house divided. But this guy Lincoln from Illinois had a lot of support in what we call the Middle West. And he was perceived as more moderate than the more abolitionist Seward, at least perceived so. And after several ballots and the wildest, noisiest political convention Americans had ever seen, including parades by clubs called the Wide Awakes, who were Republican clubs for Lincoln. Lincoln was sitting in Springfield because the candidates never came to conventions. They weren't supposed to be perceived or seen as really wanting the nomination. You can't be seen as wanting the nomination. Oh, my God. Lincoln got a telegram, "Sir, you've been nominated." A lot of the country got scared now. This is going to be a divided election. What's going to happen? Will some portion of the South, part of the South, bolt from the Union? Could there be war? So a bunch of people got together practically overnight and created a whole new party, another third party, or a fourth party. It's called the Constitutional Union Party. They had a simple platform. It said they just wanted to keep the Union together, period. There wasn't much to it. And they, too, went to Kentucky. They got John Bell. Tennessee. Ooh, they broke the pattern. John Bell's from Tennessee. And in this election, if you can't see the numbers, I'll read them to you real quickly. The Constitutional Union Party won those 3 orange states and a piece of New Jersey. That's Tennessee, Kentucky, and Virginia. John Bell, brand new candidate, 2 months before the election, wins 3 states because of the fear in the border states. And people are losing their loyalties now to political parties. Lincoln will get a little more than 1.8 million votes and about 39.8% of the vote. Didn't even get 40%. Classic minority president. Stephen Douglas won almost 1.4 million votes and 29% of the popular vote. And Breckinridge wins over 800,000 votes, all in the Deep South, 72 electoral votes. This is a hopelessly divided election. Lincoln was not even on the ballot in 10 of the 11 Deep South states. They didn't even put him on the ballot. It makes Lincoln president of the United States by a decisive loss of the popular vote, but a decisive win in the Electoral College. There's that Electoral College again. Isn't it lovely? Now, what will the South do? There's been more than talk for a long time about the possibilities of secession. Were these people reading each other wrong? Was all that rhetoric about black Republicans and all that hatred of Yankees and of abolitionists just rhetoric? Was all that loathing and fear really of the slave power conspiracy and the spread of slavery everywhere and its denigration of free labor? Was that mostly a kind of a poise? No, it turns out it wasn't. There've been periods of scholarship in American history. There've been people who have really tried, not without sometimes good motives, to wish this away, to wish this conflict away, and say that, it was just the fury of politics that pulled this off. They should have got along. They could have compromised. Should have compromised. South Carolina seceded from the Union. You can see South Carolina, if you can see the dates and the timing here, I don't know if you can, but it says December of 1860. They did. They went out in a unanimous vote of their secession convention. And Charleston turned into one big party. But then they got a little scared. 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks went by. No one had joined them. Until Mississippi in January. And then they dropped like dominoes, or some of them dropped like dominoes. Alabama, and then Georgia, and then Florida, and then Texas was last, Louisiana, and then Texas in February of 1861. You'll note that there are 4 extremely important slave states, the gray ones here, who did not secede. 7 states of the Deep South seceded. By mid-February, they called a convention. They invented a government they called the Confederate States of America. They anointed a president named Jefferson Davis, senator from Mississippi, former Secretary of War, former Commandant of West Point, and former many, many things, including the chairman of the committee that investigated John Brown's raid in the Congress and who made the call to call that off because it was an election year. Clever. In every one of these states of the Deep South, the 7, I guess that's yellow, they held either a convention of their legislature or a specially elected set of delegates. Some of them were nearly unanimous, most were not. Georgia was the closest of all. Georgia had a battle royale over that secession vote. And I'll be leaving you here in the middle of this in just a moment. But in Georgia's case, it tells us a lot, because the vote there was something like 160 to, I have the numbers here, 160 to 90 something. Upstate Georgia, the hill country, less slave population, voted against secession. Mid-Georgia and southern Georgia, the big cotton kingdom, voted for it. And the debates were bitter, because there were some Southerners not making the argument that they didn't have the right to secession, although there were a few saying that. They were making the argument that they should wait 4 more years. Wait it out. You don't know what you're doing. Take care. Others came back at them, the pro-secessionists, and they said, no, we don't have that much time. And they used the theory, or they thought the fact, of the shrinking South. They said, no. The South is shrinking. Slavery is shrinking. Our civilization is shrinking. If we can't spread, we will die. And what will happen is if the Republican Party, as they claim they are going to do, will cordon us off, block our expansion, the price of slaves in the border states, the upper South and the western edges of the South, will begin to go down, 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 down. And what will people do? They'll sell their slaves into the deep South, which will become more and more of a powder keg, and it will be dangerous. Break now. We'll never have another chance. Fateful decisions, if ever there were any, in American history. And then, for students, you're reading this magnificent little book called Apostles of Disunion by Charles Dew. It's about the secession commissioners. Every one of the 7 Deep South states sent commissioners up to the Upper South states. They need Virginia, big time. They need North Carolina. They need Tennessee. They need Arkansas. They'd love to get Missouri, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Delaware. And they send these commissioners to state legislatures. They go and meet with people. They meet with governors. They write editorials in newspapers in Nashville and so on, begging these states to join them. And look at the arguments they're making. Dew's book is so brilliant because it hangs them on their own petard. What was secession really about? They're all saying, join us and protect slavery. Join us and protect a racial system. Join us and protect our racial civilization. Join us and protect your daughters and your wives. All is on the line. The only way 4 of those states will finally join, of course, the 4 gray states, is after Lincoln is inaugurated in first week of March, 1861, and decides over the next month that he's going to reinforce Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor. Reinforce, he said. He sent a ship. He claimed full of nothing but provisions for hungry soldiers. He didn't tell anybody that the holds of the ship were full of hundreds of weapons. But the South won't wait. And they opened up with guns, about 100 cannon they had stolen from the federal government, and bombarded Fort Sumter for 36 hours. And that's the beginning of Civil War. After that, the 4 states of the Upper South, they'll take their time in Virginia. The 4 states of the Upper South will themselves also decide to join. And the United States will be divided as never before, and we haven't been quite that divided since. Lincoln went to his inauguration, as you well know, and he begged with Southern, this is before Fort Sumter, but 3 weeks before, he begged people. He begged them to think of the mystic chords of memory coming back to them from every battlefield. He begged them to accept an olive branch. He begged them to think of their nationalism and not their section. He begged them to allow the better angels of their nature to prevail. But better angels weren't in control.